Welcome, everybody. I'm Charisse. I am from the Central Branch here representing you. We're representing to you the library virtually online. This is virtual interviewing with Jayne Kaiser. We do have the closed captioning on the bottom, which is an automatic transcript, so there can be errors. It is a live transcript. We also are recording this class. We're excited to have you here today. I recognize some names from our prior job classes. We are doing a bunch of workforce development classes, and I did put 2 links in our chat to upcoming classes. I do have a job application drop-in session at 4 o'clock every other Wednesday, and you do have to register, but I put the link for that in the chat. And we do also have a resume class coming up. And I put the link to that in the chat as well. That's on March 25th. And please do watch our online classes tab on hclibrary.org because we have a lot of exciting things coming up. And we really look forward to welcoming you all to participate in our classes and also to learn about our resources. Tonight's presenter is Jayne Kaiser. Jayne has presented for us at the library before, and the classes are always so great and so informative. And one thing I just really enjoy about Jayne's classes is that she has so much experience and she's so sincerely interested in helping out our library customers in finding a better job, a new career, a better career. She really has our customers at the library's interests at heart, and I really appreciate her for that. She's got a varied background in education, finance, and training, and has been a small business owner for over 20 years. For the past 8 years, she has worked with the Department of Labor and Defense, assisting military service members as they leave the military and helping them seek employment in the civilian sector. So please join me in welcoming Jayne, and I will kick it over to you, Jayne. I need you to unmute yourself.
You would think after a year of doing online courses, I would remember where to find that mute button, wouldn't you?
Yes, we all fall into that.
The most popular phrase from 2020 was, "Wait a minute, I can't get off mute." Yes. So good evening, everyone, and thank you, Charisse, for that nice introduction. I'm really excited tonight to talk about interviewing because it is one of my favorite subjects. And I know not everybody feels that way about it, but I hope by the end of this hour presentation, you will feel a little bit more confident about interviewing, and especially about interviewing virtually, which is, I believe, here to stay. And I'll be sharing some statistics with you tonight on how it looks. How it appears to be that we're going to interview going forward. So I noticed that a couple of you have followed the directions on the screen and have typed in the chat box what you hope to gain by attending the workshop. One, understanding how to better perform on an online interview, and another, how to present yourself in the best way. So that's great. We will definitely be able to cover both of those subjects tonight. As you heard Charisse say, I have worked for the past 8 years for Departments of Labor and Defense, working with interviewing. And as a result of that, I do work with a lot of recruiters, and I never pass up an opportunity to ask a recruiter what's new and what's changed during COVID. So it was very interesting as I put together this presentation over the last couple weeks, seeing how much things have changed, and yet many things have stayed exactly the same. So I'll be sharing both aspects of that with you tonight about virtual interviewing. Here's just a quick overview for those of you that like to know where we're starting and where we're ending and what's going to happen in between. We're going to talk real quickly about the definition and the purpose of an interview, which might be slightly different than what you've heard before or what you've read in formal books. I take a little bit different view of the interview. I'm going to showcase all the types of interviews, but then we're really going to spend the majority of our time talking about the phone interview and the virtual interview. I put kind of a natural break in here after we finished talking about the virtual interview to ask any questions you have about interviewing. But I have a feeling we might still have some time left. And so then I'd like to talk briefly about the different interview stages and how to answer those interview questions. And really, like Marie said, how to best present yourself during that interview. If at any time you have questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat box. And if I don't see them because I'm focusing on speaking, Sharice will call them out for me and we'll answer those as we go along. And then you'll have another opportunity at the end as well. So let's talk a little bit about the definition of an interview. And Sharice, are they able to raise their hands or, well, I'll just have you type in the chat box. How do you feel?
Yes, they can raise their hands or they can put a note in the chat box. Either way, yes.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and have you type. How does it make you feel when you're getting ready to go to an interview? What emotion do you feel when preparing for and going to an interview? Just type your answer down there in the chat box for me. Okay, thrilled, nervous, excited. I like that. Okay, we've got a couple nervous. Yeah, it's not, oh good, we've got some excitement, anticipation, excellent. Glad to see that. I'm kind of I'll just be honest, I'm an interview nerd. I really love interviews, and it's probably why I like teaching this class so much. I think I used to be nervous, maybe at the very beginning. And then I realized that I just reframed what an interview is. So let me show you what my definition of an interview is. It's a conversation between two or more people about what you have done in the past. So just think about that. Is that something you do pretty much on a daily basis? You definitely have conversations with other people. And to put this sort of in the terms of this workshop, you're probably having virtual conversations with people. And in this case, it's a little more targeted conversation. You are telling them about what you've done in your past. Now let's talk about what is the purpose of the interview. And go ahead and put that in the chat box too. Mary Grant, I see that you have a raised hand, and on this webinar feature, I don't think we're allowed, I don't think you're enabled to actually speak. So if you do have a question, would you please put it in the chat box for us? And so what is the purpose of the interview? Okay, Lisa says it's information. Lisa, let me ask you to clarify that a little bit. Information for you or information for them? Scott says it's determine if you're a good fit for the role. Absolutely. Anybody else? For both parties to learn about the other, to get the offer or a higher level interview. Exactly. See if the company needs match the applicant. Wow, you are a smart group. So here's the long and the short of that answer. The purpose of the interview is to see if you are a good fit for the company and for you to see if the company is a good fit for you. It's not so much about checking your skills. Nowadays, your skills need to be obvious on your resume, or the person who's recommending you for the position needs to have vouched for your skills. Most companies aren't setting you up for the interview unless they're pretty convinced that you can perform the skills of the job. Now they want to meet you, whether it's in person or virtually, and figure out, do I like this person? Do I want to work with them? Do they have a good attitude? And the same thing for you. Do I want to work for this company? Do their value system match my beliefs? And so when you think about this as a two-pronged approach, it really makes it a more level playing field. Too many times applicants go in for a job interview and they may wreak a little bit of desperation because they're like, you have the job, I want the job, I need to just do whatever you need me to do to get it. And, I always compare this to dating. You can't be too eager on that first date. You got to hold back a little bit. You're still figuring out, do I like this person? Do I want a second date? And it actually makes you a little more attractive. One thing Sharice didn't talk about, I've worked in human resources a couple different times in my career, both for the government and also in private sector. And I'll tell you, when I got a candidate who asked questions that made me believe they're checking me out just as much as I'm checking them out, it all of a sudden made them a little bit more attractive. I thought, this is a person who has other options. And I need to convince this person that we're a good fit for them, just like they're convincing me that they're a good fit for us. So make sure you keep that balance when you go into the interview, not arrogance, not like I'm so good, you should want me, but I'm going to have some questions to ask you, just like you have questions to ask me. All right, so let's move on. I'm really aware of how fast this hour is going to go, but it's great if you have questions. Just pop them in the box, and we will address them. So these are in general the different types of interviews, and I have made phone and virtual a different color because those are the two we're going to focus on. But just a brief description: phone interviews come in two varieties. One is a screening interview where the recruiter will simply be sort of checking your skill set, looking at your resume, saying, I see you graduated in 2018. I see that your degree is in computer science. You've worked for 1 year for the government, just kind of going through, asking you some pretty simple questions. That's a screening interview to decide if they want to move you on to a face-to-face interview. Nowadays, a lot of second and third and multiple interviews are being done on the phone during pandemic. And if it's not a virtual face-to-face, it's a virtual phone. So that's why I chose that one in particular. We are going to talk a little bit more in depth on how to prepare and execute the phone interview. Of course, back in the days when we were seeing people in person, the next step would usually be a face-to-face. It could be with one person at a time, maybe seeing multiple people, but one at a time. Or this next one is the panel or committee, where you have maybe 4, 5, 6, maybe even more people in a room. You're sitting in one chair, they're sitting at a long table facing you, and they're asking you questions. They go around asking each of you questions. Not doing a lot of those right now. We are doing some virtual panels, which are kind of interesting, a big Zoom session with 6 or 7 people and you. So you could do a virtual panel or committee. Of course, virtual just means it's being done online with camera and audio. Meal interviews, we haven't done those in a year. I'm not sure they're going to come back. We'll have to see what's going to happen. But anybody have any idea, and you can type in the chat box, why would a company take you out for a meal interview? What's the purpose there? While you're typing that, I'm going to talk about group interviews. These have actually were gaining in popularity before the pandemic. And that's when they brought all of the candidates in at the same time. So maybe you picked your top 5 people that wanted the job, that had applied for the job. Bring them in, tell them all at the same time about the company, about the position, ask questions, sometimes asking every person the same question and letting them answer it in front of everybody, sometimes asking different people different questions. I have to say, I've had one group interview, a little intimidating. It's kind of interesting to see the competition. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about those tonight, but if you do find yourself in a group interview situation, the best advice I can give you is to be yourself. Do not try to be a poor imitation or follow what somebody else is saying or doing. Be yourself, because remember, the purpose of the interview is, are you a good fit for them, and are they a good fit for you? Now I see Stephen has chimed in and says the meal interview shows that the company is inviting. Absolutely. Marie says to check your demeanor, etiquette, and table manners. Absolutely, especially if it's a position where you will be expected to entertain clients or conduct business meetings where there will be travel and meals and that type of thing involved. A lot of times too, it's to get you to relax a little bit and just get to know more about you as who you are as a person. So again, we'll have to see what happens as we begin to open up our buildings and come back together in person, whether meal interviews make the cut or not. And if so, maybe we'll do another workshop on interviewing. But tonight we're going to talk about phone and virtual. So let's talk about phone interviews. Here are some general guidelines. Make sure to practice in advance. And I will talk more about that when we get to the virtual slide, but practice interviewing is a skill set. It's not any different than the skills that you've had to learn for your current or past jobs. It's not any different from learning a foreign language or how to play the piano. Practice will be required. And so if you don't take anything else away from this workshop, know that interviewing is a skill. It is something that needs to be practiced. And the more practice you do, the better you become. So I always like to emphasize that throughout the workshop. It is important during a phone interview to dress for success from head to toe. Now, I know some of you are like, why? I'm sitting in my house. Why can't I have on my flannel pants and my fun slippers, Well, the way you dress changes your attitude. And I learned this when I worked from home in sales. There was every Tuesday morning, I went to a networking event where I got up and I dressed in a suit and I went out and met with people. And then I came back and worked in my office the rest of the day. Many times I didn't change clothes. After a while, I began to see that my sales on Tuesdays were higher than any other day of the week. The only difference, well, two differences. One, it could have been because I got up and got out and I interacted with people first. So that could have changed my attitude somewhat. But it was also because I was dressed to work. I didn't stop in the middle of the day and throw in a load of laundry. I didn't cook. I didn't, sit down and watch a little TV. I was in work clothes and I worked all day. So having that dress for success outfit on is going to change your mentality when you're talking on the interview. Make sure you're in a quiet place where you can concentrate. I will say that working from home has loosened up some of these rules a little bit. I get to see my colleagues' dogs on a regular basis laying on their beds, behind my workmates who are on Zoom. Their children occasionally pop in and out if they're doing virtual school at home. So we have relaxed a little bit, but I encourage you for an interview to make sure that, you can put your pets in their little cage or in another room. Make sure you can close the door, that it's quiet so that you will be able to concentrate and be relaxed. Have your resume and any materials about the company available. Now, having said that, you don't want to be rustling papers and, holding up on answering while you look something up. You can't do that. Do not be Googling answers. They can hear that. But you can certainly lay out your resume, lay out the job description and any notes that you might have made. Have your list of questions that you would like to ask them prepared and laid out. And the way I do a phone interview is I lay everything out on my kitchen counter, and then I stand at the counter to do the interview, so that Standing, you'll also see it says stand up for the interview and smile. Standing up allows you to breathe better. So if you are feeling a little nervous and you feel like you're having a little trouble getting a good breath, standing will help with that. It also brings more energy to your voice, and a smile gives your voice a warmer feeling to it than when you're not smiling. So stand up for the interview and put a smile on your face. We do recommend that you don't use a speakerphone. A lot of times you'll get some echo. Again, this is where practicing with another person is a good idea. You may find that you need to use some kind of earbuds with a microphone that might get you a better sound quality. So practice with someone, have them call you, ask you a couple questions, you answer, stand where you plan to do your interview, and have them check the sound quality for you. Doing all of that in advance gives you the advantage that when you get onto the interview, you can actually relax and focus on what people are asking you and how you're answering the questions. I recommend that you be ready 10 to 15 minutes before the scheduled time. Sometimes they do start early just to see if you're ready early or not. It's another trick that recruiters, I shouldn't say trick, technique that recruiters like to use. And so being ready, just like you would show up for an in-person interview about 10 minutes ahead of time, do the same for a phone or a virtual interview. Have a phone number handy so that if they don't call you on time, make sure you know who to call and what number to call to check and see if something has shifted, so that you don't miss out on the interview. I'm going to take a quick pause here. Do you have any questions about doing phone interviews? And if so, go ahead and type them in the chat box. And if in all of that makes sense, if you want to give me, I think you should have, you should be able to give me a thumbs up, maybe. Do we have emojis?
We have a raised hand.
Just a raised hand.
That's,
Okay.
that's what we've got.
Okay.
If there's any questions, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat and I'll relay them to Jayne. Looks like we're good.
Okay, then let's move on and talk about virtual interviews. So let's check out the landscape for virtual interviews right now. So every year, a company called jobvite.com, excuse me, comes out with a Recruiter Nation survey, and they ask different questions each year. I was fortunate enough that 2021 is out already, and so I pulled a few snips off of it. So in the pandemic job market, 67% of recruiters are interviewing via video. So congratulations to those of you that are in the workshop tonight, because this is the major way that interviews are still being done. 49% are through a phone call, which is why we talked about them. 40% believe that virtual interviews will be the default moving forward. So I think they're here to stay. My recruiter friends are telling me, wow, I can get so many more interviews done in a week by using a virtual platform. I don't need to leave, half hour to 45-minute breaks between them so that they don't meet in the waiting room. I don't have to worry about people getting caught in traffic, particularly in the DC area, and being late. It's quick, it's efficient. We can cover the same amount of ground. They don't have to travel. I don't have to fly people in. I don't have to travel to other parts of the country to recruit. So it's opened up who they can be talking to. So there's a lot of both financial and just finding the best candidate that comes with using virtual. And so I do believe that it's here to stay. Let's look quickly at some of the biggest mistakes that get made. Poor connectivity is number one. 37% said that is the biggest mistake they see. That the individual who is being interviewed does not have sufficient bandwidth to get a good connection with both their camera and their microphone turned on. This is where practicing using the virtual platform in advance comes in handy. You can figure out, is this going to work doing it at my house or not? Do I need to move to a different part of my house? Do I need to move closer to the router? Do I need to do a hardwire cable into the, my internet so that I get a better connection? Do I need to find a different workspace? Do I need to go to a friend's house who has better Wi-Fi? Whatever it is, figure that piece out before it's the actual day of the interview. Inappropriate, rent a room at the library. There you go. Great suggestion, Scott. There are also, and I'm sure they still exist, there are also remote worksite offices where you can rent space. You can rent a conference room or a small cubicle, and they usually have great Wi-Fi, and get one with a door that you can close and have privacy. But yes, if you know that Wi-Fi and connectivity is a problem at your local location, find a workaround for that. Second biggest mistake is inappropriate attire. That's why I say you dress all the way down. And I'll tell you a funny little story about that in just a minute. And then the last one is poor eye contact. A lot of people, when on a virtual, especially if it's, I know with Skype, the person you're talking to, the default for that is that the picture ends up at the bottom of your screen. And so you're constantly looking down, whereas your camera is at the top. On Skype, it is possible to move the image of the person you're speaking with from the bottom up to the top, just under the camera. And by doing that, you can both see the person that you're speaking to and also appear to be making good eye contact by looking directly into the camera. So again, it is a skill that can be practiced. You just need to find somebody that's willing to get on the platform with you in advance and practice some of those skills. So let's look at the other tips and guidelines for virtual interviewing. As I just mentioned, get familiar with the platform by practicing with a friend. Test your camera and your microphone. Some microphones on your computers are not very good, and that's where you might want to think about using a headset of some type that has a microphone in it, just to make the speaking clear. Make sure that you have a professional background and a professional profile picture. So my coworker, not even knowing that I was teaching this class tonight, shared with me that she had used her Zoom, her private Zoom account, for a Christmas party with friends and family members. And then last week, she had to get on a professional government call on Zoom, and it linked to her personal Zoom account. And lo and behold, her profile picture was of a llama decorated as Santa Claus. And so the big topic at this high-level government meeting was, who's the llama dressed up as Santa? And she was pretty embarrassed. So, just a tip, save the llama for your mama and make sure that you have a professional picture as your profile if you're going to use a virtual platform for interviewing. Adjust the lighting to remove shadows on your face. You do not want to look like you are in, the witness protection program. So the way to do that is to either face a window so that natural light will be coming at you. You don't want it from behind you. That's when you get backlit and all the shadows come over your face. Or you can use a light, some type of a light that you can adjust and point toward you. You put it behind your computer or off to the side and cast light on your face so that you have good lighting. And I have a couple pictures on the next slide that will show you some setups that work well for making sure that the lighting is right. Position your webcam at eye level. We talked about that one, so you make good eye contact. Position your notes. If you do want to have some notes to use during a virtual one, you want to hang the notes behind your screen so that nobody else can see them, but you can look straight ahead and there hangs your notes right behind. So it looks like you're making eye contact with the person who is interviewing you, but you actually have a few quick notes written up there just to remind you of things that you're afraid you might forget. I do not encourage you to try and look at the notes or, flip through a notebook. You may have a notebook with you to take a few notes, but again, you want this to be a conversation between two people. And we don't usually read off notes for conversations. We don't usually take notes during conversations. You want to be relaxed and just share information about yourself. And if you've practiced, you're not really going to need those notes. But I know occasionally I'll hang a few things up just to make sure I don't forget. And then lastly, speak at a normal volume. And if you're someone who uses your hands a little bit to make some gestures, you can't really see my hands, but I am gesturing with my hands while I'm talking to you on screen, because that helps me feel more natural and relaxed and makes this much more like it were in person than if I'm just sitting here with my hands gripping the sides of my chair. So you want to be as relaxed as possible, good posture. Same thing you would do at an in-person interview, leaning in to show interest. And again, when you practice on the platform with a friend, find out what is a good volume. Is it just like they were in the room with you? Do you need to speak a little louder, or do you need to speak a little softer to make it sound comfortable for the other person? All things that can be practiced in advance. All right, let's take a pause here. And what are your questions, concerns, experiences you've had with virtual interviewing or virtual sessions that you want to ask questions about now? Any questions?
I don't see any questions, but I know people do ask what their backgrounds should be in terms of, like you said, you stand up in your kitchen.
So
Do you really try to have a very bland background, or is it better to have a more, I don't know, books behind you, or do you think it doesn't make a difference? Have you heard anything about that?
I think it needs to be professional. So by that, I mean, it should not be anything controversial, offensive. Remember, an interview is many times when the first impression is created. And so sometimes I used to say to people, sometimes what you're wearing is yelling so loudly at me that I can't hear what you're saying. So that's like your attire. So you want to make sure your attire is appropriate, and that you're well groomed, and jewelry is minimized. And I feel the same way about the background. I use the background I have. You can see my diplomas, you can see a desk there. Obviously I have some books and things in there, but you can't specifically see anything up close. Depending on the platform, you can also blur your background. So I use MS Teams a lot. It has that you can blur the background. Some people use the green screen backgrounds where you can put yourself at the beach or put yourself, in front of the White House or wherever. I have kind of mixed feelings about the green screen backgrounds, depending on how good they are. Some are very good. Others, you move your head, everything gets a little blurry and you kind of move in and out of the background. I find that very distracting. I've put blinds behind me, like if I had a window behind me that's just plain blinds. It has a little texture, but it doesn't really have anything. So kind of walk around your house and look. It's really about the lighting is the most important, but also that professional background. And I'll tell you, this was a true story that tells you why it's so important, and that the interview is not all about your skills. And I know that's a hard one to swallow sometimes. We're like, Why didn't I get hired? I was the best candidate for the job. But it's not all about your skills. This was for a graphic artist position in a government agency, one of those 3-letter agencies that we're not allowed to talk about a lot. And it was a Skype interview. And on paper, this woman was the candidate for the job. Like, everyone on the panel was very excited about her. She had great experience. She had submitted work samples. In their minds, the interview was just sort of a check the box, make sure that, let's hear her speak, let's have a little conversation with her, but this is good. She's our pick. When they connected for the interview, all they saw was this much of her face. Both eyebrows were full of piercings and several on her nose. And she was so close to the camera that that's all they could see. She had never practiced doing a virtual interview before. So the next thing they asked her to do was, please back up. They said to her, oh, you're a little close to your camera. Could you please back up? They backed up. She backed up to the point they could see her background. It was a very nice fireplace with a painting above the fireplace. But as she backed up and the painting came into view, it was obvious that it was a painting of her with no clothes. And the person that sat on the interview that told me the story said, you have never seen an interview go so quickly. Because in their mind, given where she was going to need to work, her lack of preparation, her lack of judgment on her background said to them, this would not be a good fit. We don't feel confident that she is going to represent the agency well. And she was not hired for the job, although on paper, she was their go-to candidate. So, professional background, nondescript, nothing that's going to stand out. Sometimes people have their favorite sport team displayed, a flag, something that says, oh, I'm a big, Ohio State Buckeye fan. You don't know. One of your interviewers could be a big University of Michigan fan. They are arch rivals. You don't want anything to influence that person's decision. I'm not saying somebody wouldn't hire you because they don't like your football choices. I'm just saying it may have them scrutinize you in a different way. And so keep it benign, keep it very professional. Plain, too plain is better than too busy. Okay, so we have time to cover a few more topics here, and I will give you another a chance for questions here. Here are some of the visuals that I was able to find. So in the top one on the left there, you'll see, and both that one and the one below, both of these individuals have put a window in front of them, which is going to bring good light to them and keep them from getting those shadows. The individual in the top left, it looks like he's actually recording himself as he does the interview, which is interesting because then you can always critique yourself later. I recommend that, especially if you're going to practice, get somebody to record you, and then you can find out, do I have a particular phrase that I use too often? Do I have filler words? Do I make a gesture that's distracting? So both of those are great, great setups. The person here on the right, she is in what is labeled as a virtual interview room. And I don't know if you can see my pointer, but she has a lamp that attaches to her monitor and has a little arm that swings up and out. So it projects light in front of her face, but it is not on camera. And so if you're in a room that doesn't have any windows and you can't get natural light, that is one way of getting some light on the subject for you. For the person, for any of these actually, you can always put a sticky note on the side or along the bottom of your computer, or he could put it on his little tripod or against a pot here if you needed a space to put some notes. You can always use some Post-it notes to do that. Okay, unless anybody has any questions, we have about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the stages, interview stages.
I
And
will put that, your LinkedIn address in the chat.
awesome, thank you. And how to answer interview questions. So these are in general. Most interviews go in this order. Occasionally you will hear sort of rogue interviews where recruiters take a different tactic, but in general, there are 4 stages to an interview. The first section is the introduction, where you are learning who is in the room, you're building rapport. There could be some small talk, you know, especially if it's in person. How was your commute? If it's virtually, it may be, did you have any trouble getting onto the platform? Have you used this platform before? You know, do you do a lot of virtual work where you are currently? Whatever it takes, just to build a little rapport. One thing to remember about an interview: you are a guest in someone else's house. So do not enter into an interview, and it doesn't matter whether it's in person or virtual, and try to take over the process. Even if the recruiter is not being very proactive and is sort of maybe a little more laid back style than you are a guest in his or her home, and you need to let them set the pace for the interview. So they will determine when the introduction section is over. Typically, they will tell you what the outline for the interview will be, but if they don't, a common format is that it will start by them asking you questions. At the end of them asking questions, when they feel like they've gotten all the information they need from you, then they will ask you, do you have any questions? It is critical that you must have questions to ask them. It shows that you are interested in the position. It shows that you have done research, because the questions you are going to ask them should be questions that cannot be found on the website or online. They need to be questions that are of more depth and more insight, to show that you have really researched the company, you know their mission, you found out as much about the job as you possibly can, and you're trying to figure out, is this job and company a good fit for me? So you need to have a list of strong questions. And then the closing is when things get wrapped up. They may tell you what the next step in the process is. If they do not mention, if they don't say something like, thanks for coming in today, we're going to be doing interviews for the rest of the week, and we hope to schedule second interviews for next week. Sometimes they'll volunteer that. If they don't, then your last question needs to be, may I ask what the next step is in the process? And I'm going to repeat that. And if you have pen and paper, I'm going to ask you to write it down. May I ask, what is the next step in the process? That opening phrase, may I ask, is golden. It is very polite. You're not asking, you're asking permission to ask. So it softens it. And then when you say, what is the next step in the process? You're not asking, when are you going to hire? Because that could be answered in 2 weeks. But when you ask, what is the next step in the process? Psychologically, the recruiter will feel compelled to describe the process to you. So he or she will then volunteer, We are seeing candidates the rest of this week. Next week, we hope to do our second interviews on Monday and Tuesday, and we hope to make our decision by Friday. So we will, be letting people know of our decision in the next 2 weeks. This gives you a good idea of when to expect to hear back from them, when to get your thank you note out to them after the interview, and if you're not hearing from them, when to maybe make a follow-up call. I need some feedback from you. If you can type in the chat box, does that make sense to you? And are there any questions about that?
We do have a question about what platforms are most commonly used for job interviews.
Excellent question. Okay, so gosh, there are so many. Here's what in the DC area, and I interact with a lot of different groups. Here's what I'm seeing. Zoom is probably one of the most popular. Even the government now has Zoom for government, and they're using it more. There are many government offices, mine included, that cannot use Zoom. So we are using MS Teams. We are using Adobe Connect. I know a lot of people I work with who work in secure areas and SCIFs, they are using Skype. And then there are Meetup. There are some other ones out there that I've heard the names like once or twice, and I can't even pull them out right now. But I would say your top 3 or 4 are Skype, Zoom, MS Teams, and Adobe Connect. And so that's an excellent question. When they schedule the interview, you need to find out what's the platform. If it's not something you're familiar with, investigate it well in advance. And if you have questions, you're going to want to practice with somebody on it. But then if you have questions, you still have time to call the HR rep back and say, I have a couple questions about how to use Adobe Connect. That one's a new one to me. And can you walk me through this? Have a phone number backup so that if for some reason the connection doesn't go through, you have somebody that you can call immediately and say, I am having trouble connecting. I'm not sure what's happening here. Like, you've got to have a backup plan. Okay. And somebody else put in that they use Team. Yeah, I think that's, is that different from MS Team, or is that the same one? Okay. Mary says, my last interview, the 2 interviews told me they would not maintain eye contact, but would be taking notes. Yeah, I found that difficult to determine if my answer was too long or short on target. Yes, I can give you some tips on that. So I don't know, Mary, maybe you can put in the box, was it a federal interview? And I'm finding this happening more in civilian interviews too, is that we're becoming very, we live in a very litigious society where people oftentimes, find reasons to sue people when they're not hired. And so what's happening is hiring managers are beginning to document the interviews more and more. So they're taking notes. This is why you practice your answer. You cannot assume that they will look up when you have finished answering the question. And I've seen this happen. People keep talking until the person writing looks up at them. But as long as you're talking, the person who's interviewing you will keep writing. And it goes on way too long. So the short answer is none of your questions should last for more than 2 minutes. And the way you will know that is that you will practice them in advance. So great question. Yeah, they're going to be writing, you're going to be talking, answer the question, talk for 2 minutes or less, and then stop talking and wait. Remember, you are a guest in their home. They will let you know if they need more information. They'll either ask a follow-up question like, could you tell us a little bit more about that? Could you tell us some more details? And then you have another 2 minutes. Chances are they will go on to another question. And I think if we talk a little bit about the method that you use to answer, this might be helpful also. So the STAR method stands for situation, task, action, and result. This same acronym is used when writing your bullet statements on your resume. They're used when you're writing your professional introduction that you use when you're networking, and then they are used again when you are interviewing. So if we look, I'm going to go one up here just to get a question. These are some typical interview questions. Here's one that says, can you tell me about a difficult situation and how you overcame it? So using the STAR method, you would think of a specific time. And they said, think of a difficult situation. So think of the difficult situation, define the general context. The T says, name the key objective you were responsible for, the challenges or obstacles you had to overcome. Talk about the skills you used in that section. So you've talked about the situation, you've talked about the task, what you had to do to overcome that challenge, the action that you took, maybe resources that you had to use. And then the most important part of STAR is the result. Summarize the outcome. How did you contribute? How was it a win? Most importantly, how did the company benefit from the action that you took? How was it a positive outcome? And I find that if you write out answers to questions, interview questions, using this method, practice them, they will come back naturally when you're in the interview process. It's just a great way to frame it, to make sure that you're not giving too much detail, but make sure that you're giving enough detail so that you're drawing them in. It really is about becoming a storyteller. And that's why I like to use the analogy of a conversation. The more interesting your story is, the more you can hold their attention. You pause. Sometimes not saying anything is very effective. It makes people lean in a little bit like, okay, what's the punchline here? So really craft your answers and they will sound natural. You're not memorizing them where you're just regurgitating them back. You're just memorizing the content to the point that you can now focus on the delivery. So let's take a look at some of the most common interview questions. And these are like 8 that I pulled off. You can Google interview questions and hundreds will come up. Now, we have about 8 minutes left, so I'm not going to be able to go into each of these in any detail. But let me tell you, your answers need to be targeted to the position for which you are applying and the company where the position is. So when they say, tell me about yourself, they don't want me to say, well, I grew up on a beef farm in Ohio. And, no, that's not what they're asking. What they're really saying is, tell me about you as it relates to this position. So talk about your education, experience, and training that relates to the position for which you're interviewing. That's what they're asking with that question. Why do you want to work here? They ask that question to find out if you've done your homework. What do you know about them? The last time I interviewed, I said, I read your mission statement, and here's what I liked about your mission statement. I found that it meshed well with my value system. And I knew that if I worked with a company that had similar values to mine, that was going to be a good fit, at least in that component. And I expanded on that. Okay. So just make sure that whatever your answers are, they are targeted to the position, which means every interview is going to require a different preparation and will require some tailoring because you're going to have to tailor it to that company and that specific position. All right, so to wrap us up here, I'm going to ask you one last time to put in the chat box, based on what you have heard during the past hour, what will you do differently when preparing for interviews? What's one nugget that you're going to take away from this workshop and put into practice? You can just pop those into the chat box. Practice in advance and use the STAR method. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, STAR is brilliant. I had never heard that before until I started working for the Department of Labor. And I'll tell you, it helps you even in your job when your boss asks you a question. Using STAR is awesome. Google possible questions and practice answers. Okay, good. Better lighting, stand up. Okay, great. Good. It looks like you've taken away a lot of the most important parts. And I'll tell you, and I don't think I have this on a slide. You need to practice out loud. I used to practice in my head. Oh, I'm going to say this, 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 this. Something happens between here and here. It's not good. So practicing out loud, recording yourself, videoing yourself, playing it back, that's how you get really, really good at this. I'm going to close with a quote from Alexander Graham Bell, which I think is perfect since we talked about phone interviews and he made them possible. Before anything else, preparation is the key to success. And I've also made you a little to-do list. So again, write out your answers, record or video yourself answering them, rehearse using the virtual platform so that you're very comfortable with it. I did not mention this during the class, but I do want to emphasize it here. They know about you because they have your resume. It is just as important that you know about them in advance. So when that interview is scheduled, I encourage you to ask the person setting up the interview, could you please tell me, or you could use your may I ask again, may I ask who I will be meeting with? Get the proper spelling of their name, and then do some research. Google them, look them up on LinkedIn. You may want to send them a LinkedIn request and link with them in advance. Go through the company Facebook page, see if they're mentioned, look at the company LinkedIn page, see if there's any images of them, and get to know as much about them as you possibly can. They're checking you out, you might as well be checking them out. Just putting in a little plug for my next workshop. We're going to be talking about salary negotiation, how to be paid what you're worth. That's coming up on Wednesday, June 2nd. It's not open for registration yet, but I hope when it opens up, you will consider joining me for that one too, because my second favorite topic after interviews is money. So we'll talk about salary negotiation, how to be paid what you're worth. And then it says right there at the bottom, practice, practice, practice. Thank you very much. I have enjoyed my time with you. I would have enjoyed it a whole lot more if we could have been in person and had some really great conversations, but we are at 6:58. I am more than happy to hang around for a few minutes if Charisse, if you want to enable so that they can speak, if anybody wants to have a dialogue with me, I would be happy to do that with you at this time.
Okay, I am going to just answer this one last question here.
Okay.
No, the federal resume class is a different instructor, the federal resume class that's coming up. Thank you very much, Jayne, and I'm going to stop the recording, but we will hang out here if anybody has any more questions. And thank you everyone so much for attending. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you all, especially on this beautiful night when there's so many